Hello, my name is Palmer Lucky. I'm 35 years old, and now as I sit in the quiet living room of my new home in the suburbs of Dublin, Ohio, I finally have time to reflect on my journey. This 5-bedroom villa, with its lush green garden and sparkling pool under the sunlight, is a place I never dared to dream of just a few years ago. But before I tell you about what brought me here, let me go back to the beginning. Those early days when my life was a series of responsibilities, judgmental glances and dreams snuffed out before they could even bloom. This is the story of a boy who grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a middle-class family where I was always the eldest brother, the faint shadow amidst the radiant glow of my younger siblings. I was born and raised in Columbus, a city neither too vibrant nor too dull. Our house was at the end of a small street, a 2-story red brick home with a front yard full of weeds and an old swing set that my father, Roger Lucky, would occasionally fix whenever it creaked. Dad was an insurance salesman, always busy with phone calls and short business trips. My mother, Gloria, was a homemaker, but she spent most of her time doting on my 2 younger brothers, Brody and Easton. I was the eldest, born 3 years before Brody and 5 years before Easton. In everyone's eyes, I was the big brother, the one who had to set an example, always give way and always sacrifice. But deep down, I was just a boy yearning to be loved like my brothers. Our family wasn't poor, but we weren't well off either. My parents had a simple philosophy: work hard, save money, and place high expectations on their children. But for some reason, those expectations always seemed to fall squarely on my shoulders. Brody, the middle brother, was my mother's pride and joy. He was smart, quick-witted, and always knew how to make her laugh with his clever stories. Easton, the youngest, was the most pampered in the house. With his big round eyes and a smile that could melt anyone's heart, my mother often said, "Easton is the sunshine of our family." And me? I was just Palmer, the eldest, the one who had to do everything to keep that sunshine glowing. As a child, I didn't fully grasp the unfairness, but as I grew older, the cracks in how my parents treated us started to show. I remember summer afternoons when I was 12, staying home to clean the kitchen, wash dishes, or watch Easton while Brody and he ran out to the yard to play basketball with the neighborhood kids. "Palmer, you're the big brother. You have to be responsible," my mother would say, her hand ruffling Easton's hair while I stood there, hands soaked in dishwater, my heart heavy. I didn't resent my brothers. They were young, and I loved them. But I couldn't understand why I always had to be the one to sacrifice while they were free to live their lives. My childhood memories are often tied to images of my parents sitting at the dining table, praising Brody for his high grades at school or hugging Easton when he brought home a scribbled drawing from kindergarten. I wasn't jealous, but I longed for my parents to look at me with the same pride. Instead, I got phrases like, "Palmer, you have to set an example for your brothers," or "Don't disappoint me, you're the eldest." Those words, though not malicious, were like small stones piling on my chest day after day, making me feel like I was never good enough. The only person who truly saw me, who truly cared, was my grandfather, Albert Lucky. He was a former stockbroker who had worked on Wall Street, where he experienced the wild ups and downs of his youth. After retiring, he returned to Columbus, living in a small house a few blocks from ours. Grandpa wasn't rich, but he had a treasure trove of knowledge and stories that I was always eager to hear. Every Saturday afternoon, I'd bike to his house, sit on the old armchair in his living room, and listen to him talk about his days on Wall Street, about market crashes, and about people who changed their lives with a single right decision. "Palmer," he'd say in his warm, steady voice, his eyes lighting up as if reliving those days. "Investing is like planting a seed. You have to choose the right seed, plant it in the ground, water it, and wait patiently. Sometimes it takes a decade for the tree to grow. But when it bears fruit, you'll see that all the effort was worth it." I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I loved the way he looked at me, like I was someone special, not just the big brother or the kid who does chores. Grandpa was the first person to make me believe I could achieve something great, even if I didn't yet know what that was. Those afternoons with my grandfather were the most precious moments of my childhood. He'd often pull out an old worn leather notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes about the stock market. "This is our secret," he'd chuckle, pushing his glasses down his nose. "One day you'll need it." I'd sit there at 13 listening to him explain stocks, bonds, and how the market worked. I didn't grasp it all, but I could feel the passion in his voice, and it planted a seed in my heart. A vague dream that one day I could do something great like he once did. But that dream in my childhood years was just a faint flicker. At home, I was still the quiet boy, doing everything to keep the family happy. I remember one time when I was 15, my parents bought Brody a new bicycle because he got high marks on a math exam. I stood in the corner of the room watching him gleefully ride around the yard, feeling both happy for him and hurt for myself. I had also gotten high marks on that same exam, but no one mentioned it. When I asked my mother about a new bike, she just shook her head. "Palmer, you're older now. You need to let your brothers have their turn. We're not made of money." I nodded, swallowing my tears, and went back to mopping the floor. In those years, I learned to stay silent. I learned to hide my emotions, my dreams, and even my pain. I didn't want to upset my parents or make my brothers think I was selfish. But every time I heard my parents praise Brody or dote on Easton, my heart ached. I wondered, do I really belong in this family? Or am I just a shadow, an invisible big brother existing only to serve? As I entered my teenage years, my parents' favoritism became even more apparent. Brody was sent to gifted classes, and Easton got every toy he wanted. I didn't resent my brothers, but I started to feel like I didn't belong. I wanted to be seen by my parents, to be loved like my brothers, but that seemed like too much to ask. I remember one evening when I was 16, sitting at the dining table listening to my parents talk about how Brody might get into a prestigious university. My mother turned to me, her voice gentle but sharp. "Palmer, you need to try harder. You're the eldest. You have to set an example." I just nodded, but inside I wanted to scream, "I'm trying. I want to be loved too." Only my grandfather understood me. He was the only one who didn't demand that I set an example or give way. He saw me as a person, not a role. He taught me that a person's worth isn't in what others think, but in what they persistently pursue. "Palmer," he said one rainy afternoon as I sat beside him, "you don't need to prove anything to anyone. As long as you believe in yourself, the world will have to see you differently." Those words, though simple, became a small flame in my heart. It wasn't enough to dispel the darkness of those overlooked days, but it was enough to keep me moving forward. I didn't know then that years later that flame would lead me to wonders far beyond my wildest dreams. But at the time, I was just a 16-year-old boy, living in a family where I always felt like the odd one out. And my story was only just beginning. When I turned 18, life began to take on a heavier shade of gray. I graduated high school with decent grades, but not outstanding enough to earn a scholarship. I started working at a lumber yard on the outskirts of Columbus right after graduation. For me, college was a distant dream. My parents were upfront about not having enough money to pay for all three of us to attend. "Palmer, you're the eldest. You have to make some sacrifices," my mother said, her eyes flickering with a hint of guilt before quickly turning to Brody, who was excitedly talking about his college plans. I nodded, as I always did, and stayed silent. But deep down, I felt abandoned. Brody got to go to college, Easton was pampered, and me, I had to work. The job was grueling from sunrise to sunset. I sawed wood, carried heavy loads, and wiped sweat from my brow in the stifling heat of the lumberyard. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough for me to contribute to the family's expenses. Each month, I gave nearly all my wages to my mother, keeping only a little for morning coffee or to fix my old bicycle. My parents never asked what I wanted or needed. They'd thank me cursorily, then turn their attention back to Brody and Easton. I didn't blame them. I knew the family needed my help. But every time I handed over my earnings, it felt like I was giving away a piece of my own dreams. When I was 21, Brody, with his sharp mind and charming smile, was accepted into a prestigious university in Ohio on a full scholarship. That day, my mother hugged him, her eyes glistening with pride, while my father clapped him on the shoulder, saying, "You're the hope of this family." I stood in the corner of the room clapping along with everyone else, but my heart sank. It wasn't that I was jealous of Brody. I loved him and I was genuinely proud. But I couldn't stop wondering, what about me? Will I ever be anyone's hope? Family dinners were when I felt my invisibility most acutely. I remember one evening when I was 23, the family gathered around the dining table. Brody, then a sophomore in college, was talking about his internship at a big company. My mother listened, her eyes sparkling, nodding enthusiastically. "You make me so proud." Easton, 18 at the time, chimed in, boasting about a basketball award he'd won at school and his plans to apply to a prestigious university. My father laughed heartily, slapping the table. "That's my boy. You and Brody are the future of this family." And me? I sat there, quietly eating my cold soup, trying to ignore the emptiness in my chest. Then my mother turned to me as if suddenly remembering I existed. "Palmer, how's work at the lumberyard? Any chance of a raise?" Her voice was light, but I knew she wasn't really interested in the answer. I nodded and said briefly, "It's fine, Mom." But inside I wanted to scream that the job was crushing me, that I came home every day with swollen hands and an aching back, that I had dreams too, but no one cared. The comparisons became even more stark when Brody graduated college. Not only did he earn a prestigious degree, but he also married Elise, a beautiful and intelligent woman from a wealthy family. Elise quickly became the centerpiece of my parents' conversations. "Brody sure knows how to pick them," my father said, laughing loudly at a family gathering. "Her family has a mansion in the suburbs." I sat there, forcing a smile, trying to ignore the pitying looks from a few aunts and uncles. They looked at me as if I were a failure, the elder brother who couldn't measure up to his younger sibling. Easton, the youngest, was no less dazzling. At 24, he landed a job at a tech company with a sky-high salary. He drove a sleek car, wore expensive suits, and posted glamorous travel photos on social media. Every time Easton came home, my parents lit up as if he were a celebrity. "Easton sure knows how to live," my mother said, admiring the new watch he'd gifted her. Meanwhile, I, in my worn-out work clothes, just bowed my head and finished the bread on my plate. My brothers didn't mean to hurt me, I knew that, but sometimes their careless words cut like knives. During one dinner, Brody looked at me and said, half joking, half serious, "Palmer, you're just going to keep working at the lumberyard forever? Why don't you go back to school or find a better job?" Easton chuckled, adding, "Yeah, it's the tech era now, you've got to change." I gave a faint smile and said, "I'm fine." But when I got to my room, I sat on my bed staring at my calloused hands, feeling like the whole world was mocking me. I wasn't one to give up easily, but those moments made me doubt myself. I wondered if I was living my life wrong, if I really was the failure everyone seemed to think I was. I was almost 30, still living in a small room in my parents' house, still doing manual labor and still being compared to my shining younger brothers. I felt like a shadow, faint and invisible, existing only to highlight the success of others. But in that darkness, there was still a small spark, my grandfather. He was still there, in his little house with the worn-out armchair, still telling me stories about Wall Street, about patience, and about people who overcame hardships to achieve greatness. He looked at me without judgment or comparison. "Palmer," he said one afternoon when I visited, "you don't need to be like Brody or Easton. You have your own path. Don't let anyone make you think you're not good enough." Those words were like a cool breeze blowing through my soul, amidst the stifling days of working at the lumberyard and the dismissive looks from my family. There's one thing I haven't mentioned yet. I started investing in the stock market when I was 20 years old. I began with a meager amount, just a few $100s saved from my workers' wages. I had no degree, no financial background, but I had my grandfather, my first and only teacher. He taught me the basics: how to pick stocks based on a company's value, how to diversify my portfolio to reduce risk, and above all, how to be patient. "The market is like a wild horse," he said in his deep, steady voice. "It'll throw you off if you rush, but if you learn to ride it, it'll take you far." The old notebook my grandfather had filled with notes from his years as a stockbroker on Wall Street became my guiding compass. Its yellowed pages, covered in dense blue ink handwriting, held the wisdom of someone who had weathered the storms of the stock market in the 70s and 80s. He wrote about how to identify companies with potential, how to keep emotions from clouding decisions, and how to look beyond short-term fluctuations. I read and reread that notebook, adding my own notes, feeling as though my grandfather was right there, guiding me through every step. The first stocks I bought were from small companies, names no one paid attention to. I chose them based on what my grandfather taught me. Look for companies with strong fundamentals, good management, and undervalued stock prices. I didn't have much money, so I could only buy a few shares at a time. Each month, I set aside a portion of my wages, even if it was just a few dozen dollars, to put into my portfolio. I lived frugally to the point of austerity. No parties, no bars, no new clothes, not even a meal out with friends. All of it was for the dream I believed would one day blossom. But the market was far from easy. In the early years, my portfolio grew at a snail's pace. Some months I made a few dollars in profit, but others, stock prices plummeted, leaving me sleepless for nights on end. I remember one time when I was 22, the market took a sharp dive due to a minor crisis. My portfolio lost nearly a third of its value. I sat in my room staring at my phone screen, my heart pounding, my hands trembling, tempted to hit the sell button. I thought about the money I'd poured in, the days of backbreaking work, and it felt like all my efforts were slipping away. I biked to my grandfather's house, my heart heavy. He sat in his armchair listening as I poured out my fears, then placed a hand on my shoulder. "Palmer," he said calmly, "the market isn't a straight line. It's like the ocean with waves that rise and fall. If you sell now, you'll lose everything you've planted. Be patient." I looked into his eyes, saw the certainty in them, and decided to hold on. I didn't sell, even though watching my account balance shrink each day made my heart ache. But my family didn't understand. At family gatherings, when I shared about my investing, my parents only smirked. "Palmer, you're such a dreamer," my father said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your grandfather worked in stocks his whole life, and what did he get? No house, no fancy car. Don't throw your money out the window." My mother was gentler, but her words still cut like a knife. "You should follow Brody's example, find a proper job. Investing is a gamble, not for someone like you." I bowed my head, saying nothing, but inside I felt like I was fighting alone. My brothers were even more blunt. Brody, now a financial director at his father-in-law's company, often mocked me. "Palmer, why bother with investing? Look at you, still living in mom and dad's house, riding an old bike." Easton, with the confidence of a successful young man, would laugh loudly. "Give it up, Palmer. Investing won't make you rich. Save your money and do something useful." Their words, though perhaps meant lightly, made me feel like a joke in their eyes. Family gatherings became a source of dread. I sat there listening to Brody brag about his European vacation with his wife, hearing Easton talk about the new sports car he'd bought, and watching my parents beam with pride over their successful younger sons. I stayed silent, eating with my head down, trying to hide the redness in my eyes. At times I wanted to stand up and scream that I was trying too, that I had my own dreams, but I didn't. I lived quietly, like a shadow in the very home of the people I loved. The years from my 20s to 30s were a struggle. I moved from the lumberyard to working at a construction site, where the work was even more grueling but paid slightly better. I still saved every penny I could for investing, even if it was just $10 a month. My portfolio grew slowly, but I didn't give up. I learned to keep my emotions in check, to look beyond short-term fluctuations. Some nights I spent hours studying company financial reports, trying to uncover hidden gems just as my grandfather once did. But the pressure didn't just come from the market. It came from my family, from their dismissive looks, from their careless but sharp words. My grandfather remained my only anchor. Even in his old age, he still followed the market, still called me over to discuss the stocks I'd chosen. "You're on the right path," he said, his voice weaker but still full of confidence. "Don't let the noise out there shake you. You have the heart of a true investor." Those words were the fuel that kept me going, even when I felt like I was running through a tunnel with no light at the end. But then the light came, not from the market, but from a woman who walked into my life and changed everything. Emily. I met Emily when I was 31, at a free financial seminar in downtown Columbus. I didn't go there looking for investment opportunities, but simply to learn more, to make up for the knowledge I never had the chance to gain in college. Emily was one of the speakers, an employee at a local brokerage firm. She was young, only a few years older than me, but the way she spoke about the market and emerging trends exuded a confidence and passion that I couldn't take my eyes off. After the seminar, I mustered all my courage to approach her. "I don't have a finance degree," I stammered, "but I want to learn. Can you recommend some books?" Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling. "You don't need a degree to understand the market, Palmer. You just need curiosity and discipline. I see that in you." We started talking more after that. Emily was unlike anyone else in my life. She didn't see me as a failure, didn't compare me to my brothers, and didn't ask about my manual labor job or the old bicycle I rode every day. She saw me as a person with dreams and aspirations. We met at small coffee shops where I told her about my investing journey, the sleepless nights when stocks plummeted, and my grandfather, the man who instilled belief in me. Emily listened without judgment, and sometimes she'd smile and say, "You're really special, Palmer. Not everyone can be as patient as you." A year later, when I was 32, we got married. The wedding was simple, held in a small church in Columbus with just a few family members and friends. My parents attended, but I could see a flicker of disappointment in their eyes. Perhaps they'd hoped I'd marry someone like Elise, Brody's wife, with a wealthy background. But Emily didn't need wealth to make me happy. She was the first person besides my grandfather to believe in me unconditionally. After the wedding, we moved out, renting a small apartment in the suburbs. The apartment had only one bedroom with peeling white paint and a window overlooking a noisy street, but to me, it was paradise. For the first time in my life, I felt I had a real home, where I wasn't the big brother or the failure, but just Palmer, the man who was loved. Emily wasn't just my wife. She became my partner in my investing journey. With her experience at the brokerage firm, she had a sharp eye for the market. One evening, as we sat on the old sofa in our apartment, Emily opened her laptop and showed me a chart. "Palmer," she said, her voice brimming with excitement, "artificial intelligence, AI, is changing the world. This is the next big trend. If you want to make a breakthrough, invest in it." I looked at her, hesitant. My portfolio, though slow-growing, had stabilized over the years. The stocks I'd chosen were safe, as my grandfather had taught me. Pick solid bricks to build your house. But AI? It was a new, risky field, and I wasn't sure I had the courage to take the leap. I brought Emily's idea to my grandfather. He sat in his armchair, his frail hands holding a cup of tea, listening as I explained. "Emily's right," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Investing isn't always about playing it safe. Sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone to seize an opportunity. But be careful. Research thoroughly and don't put all your eggs in one basket." I nodded, feeling a surge of energy course through me. My grandfather's advice, combined with Emily's confidence, pushed me to act. I decided to sell my entire old portfolio, the stocks I'd held for 10 years, and pour the capital into AI companies. That decision wasn't easy. My old portfolio, though modest, was the result of years of saving and patience. Selling it felt like cutting away a part of myself. I remember the night before I hit the sell button, lying next to Emily, my heart pounding. "I'm afraid I'll mess this up," I whispered. She took my hand, her eyes gentle but resolute. "I believe in you, Palmer. You've been on the right path for a decade. This is just the next step." Her words were like a calming tonic, steadying my nerves. The next morning, I sold my entire portfolio, gathering just over $15,000, the largest sum I'd ever had. I invested it all in the stocks of AI companies, names that were rising fast but also wildly volatile. The first few months after that decision were an emotional whirlwind. AI stock prices swung dramatically. Some days they soared, filling me with excitement, but others they crashed, leaving me sleepless. I remember one week when the market dipped due to a negative report about the tech sector, and my portfolio lost nearly 20% of its value. I sat in our apartment, staring at my phone screen, feeling like the ground was crumbling beneath me. When Emily came home and saw me sitting there, dazed, she hugged me. "Palmer, you've been through tougher times than this," she said. "Trust our choice." I looked at her, drawing strength from her, and nodded. "I believe in you," she added, and those 3 words became the flame that warmed me through the darkest days. I also called my grandfather, telling him about the fluctuations. Though his health was frail, he still took the time to analyze with me. "You've chosen the right direction," he said over the phone, his voice trembling with age. "AI is the future. But remember, Palmer, the market never follows your will. Stay calm and wait." He even sent me a long email listing lessons from his Wall Street days about handling volatility and keeping emotions in check. I printed that email and taped it into his old notebook, a reminder that I wasn't alone. 2 years passed, and what happened next surpassed my wildest dreams. The AI stocks began to skyrocket. The small companies I'd invested in, thanks to Emily's thorough research and my grandfather's guidance, became giants in the industry. By the time I was 34, my portfolio was worth over $9 million. I remember the day I checked my account and saw that number. I sat on the sofa, my hands trembling, unable to believe my eyes. When Emily came home, I pulled her into my arms, tears streaming down my cheeks. "We did it," I whispered. She smiled, hugging me tighter. "No, you did it. I just walked with you." Less than a month later, Emily brought even bigger news. She was pregnant, and not with one child, but twins. I dropped to my knees on the floor, holding her, feeling like the whole world was smiling at me. For the first time in my life, I didn't just feel like I was surviving. I was truly living. I called my grandfather immediately, my voice choking with emotion. "Grandpa, I'm going to be a father. And I'm a millionaire." He laughed over the phone, his voice frail but filled with joy. "I knew you'd do it, Palmer. I always knew." With the money from my investments, I decided to buy a 5-bedroom villa in the suburbs of Dublin, Ohio. The house had a lush green garden, a small pool sparkling under the sun, and cost just $600,000, a bargain for its true value. Emily and I moved in, preparing a new home for our soon-to-be-born twins. But despite my wealth, I kept my simple lifestyle. I still drove my old car, wore ordinary clothes, and didn't flaunt my fortune. Only Emily and my grandfather knew the truth. To my family, I was still Palmer, the quiet big brother who never made it in their eyes. But deep down, I knew I'd found my own success. Not because of the money in my account, but because I dared to believe in myself, dared to step out of my comfort zone, and dared to love. Emily and my grandfather were the only 2 people who truly saw me, and that was all I needed. I didn't know that just a few months later. A family gathering would change the way everyone looked at me, and my story would turn to a new chapter, full of drama and emotion. It was a fall day when I was 35, and the entire Lucky family gathered at Uncle Gene's farm, my father's younger brother. Uncle Gene was a jovial farmer, always wearing a checkered shirt and a straw hat, with a wide smile that warmed everyone's heart. His farm, located on the outskirts of Columbus, stretched across golden fields glowing under the sunlight, with a large wooden house spacious enough for the whole extended family to come together. These gatherings were a tradition, where my grandfather, parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, and even close neighbors of Uncle Gene would eat, talk, and boast about their achievements. But for me, these occasions were often a challenge, a stage where I was always pushed into the shadows, serving as a backdrop for others' brilliance. Emily and I arrived bringing a tray of homemade cookies, her recipe simple but fragrant. Uncle Gene's house was buzzing with laughter and chatter. Aunts were bustling in the kitchen, preparing a feast of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and cornbread, the familiar dishes of the Lucky family. My grandfather sat in a corner of the living room, on an old armchair Uncle Gene had brought from his house. He looked frailer than before, his white hair thinning, but his eyes still sparkled, and when he saw me, he smiled and motioned for me to sit beside him. "Palmer," he whispered, "today will be a special day." I didn't understand what he meant, only smiled and held his hand, feeling the warmth from his frail grasp. The party began as the sun set, with golden light from lanterns hanging on the porch illuminating the garden. Everyone gathered around a long wooden table covered with a red and white checkered tablecloth. My father, Roger, sat at the head of the table with my mother, Gloria, beside him. Brody and his wife, Elise, sat nearby, both dressed impeccably as if they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Easton, the youngest, arrived late in a sleek suit, driving his newly bought sports car, which drew gasps from the younger cousins. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and Uncle Gene's close neighbors were all there, creating a lively but, for me, pressure-filled atmosphere. Emily and I sat at the corner of the table, quietly eating and chatting with a few relatives. I tried to blend into the mood, but deep down I knew the uncomfortable moments were coming. And as expected, they arrived sooner than I thought. As the main course was served, my father raised a glass of wine, his voice booming. "Today is a special day with our family gathered together. I'm proud of my sons, Brody with his brilliant career and happy family, and Easton, the kid making waves in the tech industry." The table erupted in applause, laughter filling the air. Brody smiled, raising his glass in return, while Easton winked at the kids, making them giggle. I clapped along, but my heart grew heavy. I knew my father wasn't done, and I knew what was coming next. Sure enough, he turned to me, his voice light but sharp as a blade. "And Palmer," he said, pausing for effect, 35 years old and still renting, with a wife about to give birth. "Times are tough, son, but look at your brothers for inspiration. Brody and Easton, they've even bought 2-bedroom houses." The table burst into laughter, as if his words were a harmless joke treasure, but they stung. Brody smirked, giving me a look of half pity, half mockery. "Yeah, Palmer," he said, his tone almost patronizing. "You should invest in something more practical like real estate." Easton laughed loudly, chiming in. "Or at least get a new car. Riding that old bike makes you look so pitiful." I bowed my head, feeling the weight of every gaze on me. Those words weren't new. I'd heard them hundreds of times over the past 15 years, but this time, they hit like hammer blows, making it hard to breathe. Emily, sitting beside me, gripped my hand tightly under the table. I could feel her anger and the strength of her squeeze. She looked up, about to stand and say something, but I gently shook my head, signaling her to stop. I didn't want to make a scene, to turn the party into an argument. I was too used to staying silent, to swallowing my pain. But then, a voice rang out, firm and commanding, cutting through the laughter. It was my grandfather. He stood up from his chair at the corner of the table, leaning on his cane, his frail figure radiating an undeniable strength. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "You're all wrong," he said, his voice slow but razor-sharp, slicing through the air. "Palmer isn't renting. He bought a 5-bedroom villa in Dublin, Ohio with a garden and a pool. And his investment portfolio? It's worth over $10 million. The table froze. The clatter of forks and knives dropping onto plates echoed. My mother's mouth fell open, her wine glass tilting unnoticed in her hand. My father's face flushed red, his eyes wide with disbelief. Brody and Easton, who had mocked me moments ago, stared at me as if I were a stranger. Aunts, uncles, and cousins whispered among themselves, their eyes filled with shock. $10 million? A cousin muttered. How did Palmer do that? I felt Emily's gaze beside me, not surprised but proud. She already knew everything, and she smiled, squeezing my hand tighter. My grandfather continued, his voice resounding in the silent room. You've all been wrong to underestimate him. Palmer has worked hard, been patient, and built something none of you could even dream of. He doesn't boast, doesn't need anyone's approval, but today I want you all to know the truth. My heart pounded. Every eye was on me now, but for the first time, not with pity or mockery, but with curiosity, astonishment, and perhaps even admiration. I took a deep breath, stood up, my legs slightly trembling, but my voice, when it came, was surprisingly calm. I wasn't going to say anything today, I began, looking around the table. But since Grandpa spoke up, I think I should explain. I told them my story. From the days toiling at the lumberyard, saving every penny to invest, to the sleepless nights when stocks crashed. I spoke of the times my parents mocked me, my brothers laughed at me, and how I felt like a shadow in our family. I don't blame anyone, I said, looking directly into my father's eyes. I understand Mom and Dad wanted me to set an example, to sacrifice. But I had my own dreams, and I chose my own path. I talked about my grandfather, his old notebook, and the slow and steady philosophy that guided me through the hardest years. I spoke of Emily, who believed in me, who joined me in venturing into AI and helped make my dreams come true. I didn't invest to show off, I said, my voice softening. I invested to live true to my values, to prove that patience and discipline can take you further than any shortcut. The room was silent. My mother bowed her head, her eyes red with tears. My father, who had always seen me as a failure, looked at me with a strange expression, as if trying to comprehend the man before him. Brody and Easton were no longer smiling. Brody muttered, You really did that?" Easton, for the first time in his life, was speechless, staring at me with an embarrassed look. The atmosphere at the table had completely changed. Those who had once mocked me now began asking questions, wanting to know how I did it. An aunt clapped her hands, saying, "Palmer, you're the pride of this family." Uncle Gene, with his wide grin, stood up and hugged me, exclaiming, "You little rascal, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Laughter filled the air, but this time it wasn't mocking. It was filled with respect. Emily held my hand, smiling. My grandfather looked at me, his eyes shining with pride. I sat down, feeling as if a massive weight had been lifted from my chest. For the first time in my life, I was no longer a shadow. I was Palmer Luckey, the big brother, the husband, the soon-to-be father of twins, and the man who dared to follow his dreams no matter the odds. The party at Uncle Gene's farm ended with lively laughter and chatter, but this time, I was no longer on the sidelines. I left with a sense of relief, as if I had reclaimed myself after years of being overlooked. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, an unexpected meeting opened a new chapter, not just for me, but for the entire family. One Saturday afternoon, while I was fixing the wooden fence in the backyard of our new villa, my phone rang. It was my grandfather. His voice was weak, but warm, as always. "Palmer, can you come to my place for a bit? There's something I want to talk about." I was surprised. He rarely called with such urgency. I wiped the sweat from my brow, told Emily I'd be back soon, and pedaled my old bicycle to his small house on the outskirts of Columbus. The familiar road lined with red maple trees took me back to my childhood days when my grandfather was my only anchor. When I pushed open the door, I was startled to see Brody and Easton already there. Brody sat in my grandfather's old armchair, holding a cup of coffee, his face pensive, a far cry from his usual confident demeanor. Easton leaned against the wall, eyes fixed on the floor, his expensive suit looking out of place in the modest room. My grandfather sat in his usual chair, his worn leather notebook on the table in front of him. The air in the room was heavy, unlike the lively family gatherings of the past. I sensed something significant was about to happen. "Sit down, Palmer," my grandfather said, gesturing for me to take a seat beside him. I pulled up a wooden chair, my curiosity piqued. Brody looked at me, offering a strained smile. "Palmer," he began hesitantly, "Easton and we want to talk to you." Easton nodded but said nothing, rubbing his hands together as if searching for the right words. I glanced at my grandfather, who gave a slight smile as if he'd known this was coming. Brody took a deep breath and started. "Palmer, after the party at Uncle Gene's, I've been thinking a lot. I'm sorry for the things I said before, for all the times I mocked you, saying your investing was pointless. I was wrong." His apology caught me off guard. Brody, the confident younger brother who was always our parents' pride, now sat before me with a sincere, almost vulnerable expression. "Being a son-in-law in Elise's wealthy family isn't as easy as everyone thinks," he continued, his voice lowering. "My in-laws have high expectations. They want me to succeed, to make a lot of money, to be worthy of their daughter. Every day I have to maintain this perfect image, a successful husband, an outstanding financial executive, but you know what, Palmer? I'm exhausted. I don't have freedom, no control over my life. Everything I do has to be approved by my wife's family. Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life." I looked at Brody, seeing him open up in a way I never had before. He was always the dazzling brother with a beautiful house, a fancy car, and lavish vacations. But now I saw a different Brody, one trapped in his own success. I wanted to say something, but Brody raised a hand, signaling he wasn't done. "I look at you and I realize you've done what I didn't dare. You've lived true to yourself. You didn't chase anyone's expectations, didn't pretend. I want to learn that. I want to learn how to invest, not to get rich, but to have freedom." Before I could respond, Easton spoke up, his voice hoarse, as if he'd been holding these words in for too long. "Palmer, I'm sorry too. I always thought I was better than you because I had a good job, money, a nice car, but you know what? My job at the tech company isn't what I've bragged about." He paused, his eyes avoiding mine, as if struggling to admit the truth. "It's a cutthroat environment. I work 16 hours a day, always under pressure to outdo my colleagues, to meet targets. My boss doesn't care who I am, only about results. Some nights I sit in my car not wanting to go home because I don't know if I'll still have a job tomorrow. I'm not sure about my future, Palmer. I feel like I'm running on a treadmill, going as fast as I can, but I don't know where I'm headed." Easton's confession pierced my heart. The youngest brother, always radiant, always appearing with a confident smile and boastful stories, now looked so fragile. I realized that while I had once envied my brother's success, they were carrying their own burdens, pressures I hadn't seen. "I heard you talk at the party," Easton continued, "about how you invested, how you stayed patient. I want to learn that, Palmer. I want something to rely on, something that isn't controlled by my job or other people." I looked at my brothers, feeling the invisible wall between us crumbling. For years I'd thought I was the one left behind, looked down upon. But now I saw Brody and Easton, successful in others' eyes, struggling with their own pain. I glanced at my grandfather, who nodded slightly as if to say, "This is your moment to do the right thing, Palmer." I took a deep breath and spoke. "Brody, Easton, I'm not mad at you. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, and I'm glad you're here wanting to share and learn. I'm no expert, but I'll help you just like Grandpa helped me." I turned to my grandfather, smiling. "And I think Grandpa would love to teach us all over again." My grandfather laughed, his voice weak but filled with excitement. "That's right, my grandsons. I'm old, but I've still got enough in me to pass on a few tricks." He pushed the worn leather notebook across the table, opening it to a page filled with dense handwriting. "Investing isn't just about money," he said, his eyes sparkling as they did when I was a child. "It's about patience, discipline, and believing in yourself. You boys want to learn? Good. But remember, this isn't an easy path. You have to be ready." Brody and Easton nodded, their eyes filled with determination. I felt a new connection between us brothers, as if we were truly understanding each other for the first time. My grandfather began explaining, as he once did with me, about picking stocks, analyzing the market, and keeping emotions in check. I chimed in, sharing lessons from my own failures and successes, especially my turnaround with AI stocks. Brody took careful notes, while Easton, though still a bit shy, started asking sharp questions. That afternoon passed with stories, lessons, and even laughter. For the first time, I felt I wasn't just the big brother, but a true sibling, someone my brothers trusted and respected. As the sun set, we sat around the small dining table in my grandfather's house, eating Emily's cookies and drinking tea. My grandfather looked at the three of us, smiling. "I'm proud of you, boys," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Not because of money, but because you're finding ways to live true to yourselves." As I biked home, my heart felt lighter than ever. I was no longer a shadow, but I didn't need to shine brighter than my brothers either. We were siblings, each with our own path, and now we were walking together with my grandfather leading the way. I knew the road ahead for Brody and Easton wouldn't be easy, but I believed they'd find their freedom just as I had. And I'd be there, not just as the big brother, but as their partner. The months following the meeting at my grandfather's house ushered my life into a new phase, filled with light and hope. Emily gave birth to our twin boys, Lucas and Liam, on a chilly winter day, when the first snowflakes fell on the garden of our villa in Dublin, Ohio. I stood in the delivery room holding Emily's hand, tears streaming down my face as I heard the first cries of our sons. They were tiny, pink, and fragile, but in their closed eyes I saw a whole new world opening up. Emily, exhausted but smiling, whispered, "We did it, Palmer." I kissed her forehead, feeling a happiness I'd never known before. Our 5-bedroom villa quickly became a true home. I spent weekends fixing up the house, repainting the living room walls, and building a small swing set in the garden for Lucas and Liam to use when they grew older. Emily, despite being busy with the twins, still found time to follow the stock market with me. Our investment portfolio continued to grow, but I was no longer obsessed with the numbers. Money to me was now just a tool to ensure security and happiness for my family. I still drove my old car, wore simple clothes, and lived true to myself, the way my grandfather had taught me since I was young. Brody and Easton, as promised, began learning about investing with seriousness. Brody called me on weekends asking about analyzing financial reports or picking long-term stocks. He opened a small investment account starting with mid-sized tech companies, and for the first time I saw him excited about something unrelated to pleasing his wife's family. "Palmer, I'm starting to understand why you were so patient," Brody said during one meeting, his voice full of gratitude. "Investing isn't just about money, it's about feeling in control of your own life." Easton progressed faster than I expected. With his quick mind, he dove into researching new trends, particularly in blockchain and renewable energy. Once he sent me a long email listing potential stocks, asking, "What do you think of these? I want to give them a try." I laughed out loud reading it, remembering my own eager days when I first entered the market. My grandfather and I often met with Brody and Easton holding investment lessons at his house. Despite his declining health, my grandfather was still passionate. His worn leather notebook always open on the table, a symbol of patience and faith. My parents began to change as well. After the party at Uncle Gene's, they called me more often, asking about my life, Emily, and the twins. One day, my mother visited the villa and stood in awe before the lush garden and sparkling pool. "Palmer," she said, her voice choked with emotion, "I'm sorry for not seeing you. I was wrong to think you weren't good enough." I hugged her, telling her I didn't hold it against her. My father, though less vocal, started showing respect. He asked me about the stock market and even sought my advice on his retirement fund. For the first time in my life, I felt my parents saw me as their son, not just the big brother who had to sacrifice. The pinnacle of the story came at the 1-month celebration for Lucas and Liam. We held it at the villa, inviting the entire extended family. My grandfather, parents, Brody, Easton, Uncle Gene, aunts, uncles, and all the cousins' kids. The garden was decorated with balloons and lanterns, the table laden with cakes, fruits, and dishes Emily and I had prepared. Children's laughter echoed everywhere, mingling with the soft music from outdoor speakers. Lucas and Liam, dressed in blue onesies, lay in their cribs, their big round eyes curiously watching the crowd. My grandfather, though reliant on his cane, was the heart of the party. He sat in the armchair I'd brought from his house, telling the kids stories about his Wall Street days. Brody and Easton, now closer than ever, helped me grill meat and mix fruit punch, joking as they worked. "Palmer, I get it now," Easton said, pointing at me with a grin. "I'm learning how to be a big brother." The whole family burst into laughter, and for the first time I felt we were truly a family. No more distance, no more comparisons. As the sun set, I stood in the garden watching everyone gathered together, hearing Uncle Gene's laughter, the aunts singing, and Lucas's soft cry as Emily picked him up. I felt a complete happiness, as if every hardship I'd endured had led me to this moment. My grandfather looked at me from a distance, smiling, and I knew he felt it too. That the seeds he'd planted in me had blossomed, not just for me, but for the whole family. When the party ended, I sat with my grandfather on the armchair, the twins asleep in their room. He held my hand, his voice trembling. "Palmer, I knew you'd do it. And I'm proud that you did, not just for yourself, but for those you love." I hugged him, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you, Grandpa," I said. "It's all because of you." Looking back on my journey, I've realized that success isn't about the numbers in your bank account or the recognition from others. Success is freedom. Freedom to live true to your values, to love and be loved, to build a meaningful life. My advice, if you'd like to hear it, is to be patient and believe in yourself even when no one else does. Sometimes quiet perseverance is the most powerful weapon. And remember, as my grandfather taught me, investing is like planting a seed. You have to wait for the tree to grow, but when it bears fruit, every effort is worth it.